Hi, I'm David Scranton, and thank you for clicking this video as we talk today about mutual funds, what they are, how they work, the pros and cons, and some other alternatives if you're at or near retirement age. And to help me with this also important topic, I want to bring in today's special guest, and that is author and economist, Dr. Art Laffer. Dr. Laffer, thanks so much for being back here on The Income Generation.
My pleasure, David. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
So Art, it seems like the only thing that can spook markets in the past year or two is this concept of inflation, but now you have this new Omicron variant. What impact do you think that's going to have first on the economy and then on the markets as we move into 2022?
Well, on the market side, I want to give everyone a full disclosure. There are no risk, no money-back guarantees. I have a much harder time forecasting the future than I do the past, just for the record, David. But based upon history, the inflation has a very poor impact on the economy, obviously. I mean, one of the things that really generates prosperity in the country is a stable valued currency. A strong dollar is really good for the country. And the more inflation we have, that means the weaker the dollar, the worse contracts are going forward. And all of that. Inflation is a real big enemy of stock markets and of economies, just for the record. I believe that inflation is not transitory here, although I can't be sure. But I don't believe it's transitory. It may have a little downturn, but I think there's a real problem because they've subsidized all of this demand and they've made it very attractive for people not to work. So you get less supply, more demand, and that's a classic situation for prices to rise. Now, they will bobble around, but now as far as the market goes, inflation has historically been very unkind to financial markets. If you go back to the 70s, I think from, 1966 to 1982, if you look at that period, and I'm using the Dow or the S&P, the market fell by an average annual compound rate in real terms of 7% per annum. We had a declining market. I think it was 1,000 in February of 1966. In August of 1982, it was about 770, something like 777 was its low. But then prices had trebled. Prices trebling was a killer, as well as taxes, as well as excess government spending. But inflation's really bad on markets.
And that was a longer period of inflation. So when you say this inflation isn't transient, the longest economic forecasts I've seen are that inflation might take us into 2024. But I haven't really talked to many people who think we're going to have this escalated rate of inflation past 2024. Do you tend to concur with that, or do you think this elevated rate of inflation will go beyond 3 years out?
I have no idea whether it will go beyond. I mean, long-term forecasts are I don't think they know either, but they might. But I sure as heck don't. But right now, the situation is and once inflation starts, there's a great deal of serial correlation. The best forecaster of this year's inflation is last year's inflation if you look at long periods of time. So once you get an inflationary environment, it continues and continues. And once you get a deflationary environment, like let's say from the 1980 time of Paul Volcker, 79, 80 on down, you get interest rates and inflation falling for long periods of time. So you get periods of high inflation and periods of low inflation and declining inflation.
And of course, Art, what the current administration is trying to do with its spending efforts really just pours gasoline on the inflationary fire, right?
Well, it makes inflation much more prone to inflation. And what they've done with the banking system by having all these excess reserves is there's no monetary way of bringing inflation back under control either. So you have all of that. Now we have a strong dollar, but that's strong against other countries that are equally as weak. So is it a strong world economy? I don't think so. But the dollar yet has not collapsed.
So Art, let me pivot then. Let me pivot to the next topic, which is really getting back to the variant, like the Omicron variant that's out there today, or maybe future variants that are out there. How much do you think that could negatively affect the economy as the virus continues to mutate?
Yeah, I don't think the Omicron or any of these viruses are per se bad on the economy. It's how governments respond to them that really causes the economy. So what will be the political reaction to Omicron, let's say, versus the last one that we had, the Delta, I think, was a variant? How will the government respond to this? If it does all the lockdowns and all of that, and big, huge government spending programs, I think it'll be very bad for the economy. If the government understands that it's here to stay for a long period and we got to live with this virus, then it'll be very different and we'll have a better response.
That's right. Now, the new tax laws are still not completely known, of course, and you've been a little bit less concerned than you were initially about the tax increases because you don't think they're all going to get passed, at least not what the tax increases that the left really want. Are you still feeling like any tax increases would be just maybe a blip on the radar when it comes to the economy or the stock market?
Well, taxes are never a blip on the radar, and they're never a blip on the radar, but you're putting me into a corner about forecasting what's going to happen next week. I have no idea what the bill is, but I am not as pessimistic as I had been initially about the bill. I just don't see the Democrats doing that. But they have a very big tendency to kill themselves, and have the circular firing squad, and they just might do it.
Yeah, it's a crazy phenomenon, but you're right. And now the other
they're
uncertainty,
crazy people.
Now the other uncertainty is the Federal Reserve, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How much do you think the Federal Reserve will get it right this time? I mean, they've created as many recessions as they've solved. So, how much hope do you have that this time they'll find just the right mix of policy to not actually create or accelerate the next recession?
Well, I think they've created more than they've solved. And to be very serious with you, what they have done is they've pumped in so much monetary base into the system that there's no way of controlling inflation or anything by controlling the growth rate of the money supply or by controlling bank reserves or any of that. So all they can do now is keep interest rates low by buying every dollar of debt that the Treasury issues, which is what they have been doing, and that's the only way they can hold rates down. It's what they did in the World War II up through the Accord of 1951, and that's a bad policy, both short-term and long-term, but once you get into it, it's really bad, because if you try to get yourself out of it by letting markets determine interest rates rather than the Fed, you could cause a very sharp market adjustment. Stock prices relative to GDP, the stock market value relative to GDP is very, very high by historical standards.
And you've felt that way for now. So have I missed anything that potentially could knock the market off its perch beside that it's overvalued, right? We talked about inflation. We talked about new variants to COVID-19. We talked about taxes. I mean, so did we miss anything? What else could possibly knock the market off its perch?
Well, the government spending has been buying, just pumping money into corporate balance sheets, pumping money into consumers who don't work. That's what this does. So this is the big. If this Build Back Better bill fails, and it's too bad the other one didn't fail as well, but if this Build Back Better bill fails, I think that'll be very bullish for the economy and the markets. If it passes, I think it'll be a long-term killer of markets. I mean, it will slow U.S. economic growth. It will slow, and sooner or later that will fall into corporate profits falling. And it's very bothersome to me to see the government meddling and all this stuff. Markets should be left alone. And that's where the capitalist system really works beautifully in maintaining prosperity and eliminating poverty, just like it did under Trump. But these guys can't leave well enough alone.
Well, Dr. Laffer, you've run long enough that you know that in this era, free markets really aren't free markets anymore. But Dr. Laffer, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's always our pleasure having you here on the show.
Pleasure, David. Thank you.
Thanks for watching today's video, The Mysteries of Mutual Funds. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button to give us a like, and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel each and every week for new content.